So The Well is a lived experience recovery organisation. We've been running for 12 years. All of the people who work for us have some form of lived experience, and it gives us a unique insight into a trauma-informed approach. Okay, so there's three of us speaking, so I won't be covering the whole lot. We've got Mike coming up and then Pete, and we've all got a little different section each. So I was going to talk about ACEs and creating the right environment for recovery. I'm not going to teach you all this stuff, because if you're here in this room, you'll have done trauma-informed training, you'll know the stuff, you'll know the pillars, you'll know the... But ACEs is an important part of it. We know that ACEs affect people all the way through their life, and ultimately lead to an early death. We know that people with an ACE score of 5 or more are 10 times more likely to suffer addiction, that there's a direct association between ACEs and domestic violence, that people with an ACE score of 4 or above are 36% more likely to suffer mental health issues, depression, anxiety. So we know all this. But lived experience people never forget it, because they've lived it themselves. And one of the pillars of trauma-informed approach is the universal assumption. And that's something that people with lived experience will never forget, because we've suffered those traumas. Again, I'm not going to teach you this stuff. It's on there to just for information. But why is lived experience different? So we can create a safe environment because we know what a safe environment for us is. I had a story from our business development manager. He went into a service that we were partnering with, and there was a guy sitting in reception, and he asked him if he wanted a cup of tea. And the receptionist said, "You can't make him a cup of tea, he might throw it on you." So he went up to the guy and he said, "Look, if I make you a cup of tea, you're going to throw it at me." And the guy said, "What are you talking about?" So he made him a cup of tea. Those little things make the difference when you're going into a building. Trustworthiness. If I can share some of my lived experience with someone coming through the door, I can get that identification, I can build that trust. Choice, collaboration, empowerment, that's all about working with someone, not telling them what to do. Finding out what they want. The amount of times I've heard people say, "Well, what are you here for?" "Oh, I want to stop drinking." Nobody then goes on to ask the question, "Well, why? Why do you want to stop drinking? What will you be able to do if you stop drinking that you can't do today?" You know? If we don't know what someone's motivations and values are, how can we help them? How can we motivate them? It's got to be more than transactional. And the big one for me is the universal assumption. Chances are, if someone's walking through our door with domestic violence issues, mental health issues, substance misuse issues, there's a way better than even chance they've suffered from trauma. And it says their relationship is the intervention. Anybody who comes in suffering mental health, domestic violence, or substance misuse is going to be isolated. It's something we don't talk about. That's why mutual aid and peer support is so important. Just taking that time to find out about someone, what makes them tick, why do they want to stop drinking? Spending time getting to know someone, making them feel like a human being is vital to a trusting and therapeutic relationship. Sometimes the connection you get with these people is more important than any action you might tell them to do or suggest that they do. Managing emotions, again, lived experienced people, or let me speak for me. In order for me to get my recovery, I had to do a lot of work on myself. That involved looking at my feelings, looking at my emotions, looking at what triggers my actions. And through that, I've developed a level of emotional intelligence that I would never have got otherwise. This slide would probably have been better near the end, but it basically is just saying that talking about trauma is really, really beneficial for people if it's done in the correct environment and the response of the listener is trauma-informed. So this was going to be Dave's bit, but he's double booked, so here goes. Okay, so back sometime, I don't know the date, Bruce Alexander performed an experiment that would probably not be very ethical in today's world. So what he did is he put a bunch of rats in individual cells with nothing in them. He gave them a food bottle, and he gave them a food bottle laced with drugs. He also put a bunch of rats in a lovely big pen, all together, with hay and play wheels and all sorts of goodies, and he put the same two bottles in their cage. The isolated rats used drugs to the point of death. The rats in Rat Park hardly touched them. And just to check his findings, he switched them round. And the ones that were isolated, when they were put in the nice pen, didn't touch the drugs. The ones that were in Rat Park and got isolated used drugs to the point of death. So that tells us that the environment is really important if people want to recover. And that's why building a community of trauma-informed people is so important. It's no good them coming into one organisation being trauma-informed if they go down the road and they're getting stigmatised. So Carl Rogers said the 3 conditions required for a therapeutic relationship to exist is empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. So what Dave did is he took that and said, well, how do we apply that to a community? How do we apply that to an organisation? He came up with the core conditions for recovery. Lived experience, connection, meaning and purpose, community, a trauma-safe environment, and hope. It's not wildly different to the work done by William White on Recovery Capital, you know. It's not wildly different. All of the research, all of the work done by all of the different people all has a massive overlap as to what's important. Everybody agrees that connection is really, really important. We can generate connection with people really quickly through lived experience. If we can show somebody that we've been where they've been, we know what it feels like, and already we've filled 1 and 2. And 6. Because the person sitting opposite us can see us and say, well, how did you do it? How have you managed to do it? How was somebody like me, who was a heroin addict for 20 years, ended up speaking in front of you guys at the Marriott Hotel in Preston? No. Giving people meaning and purpose. need a reason to get up in the morning. That's why a lot of people do drugs. They have no meaning, purpose, no reason to get up in the morning. And community. We're all here to talk about trauma-informed communities. Part of our reason for being is to create recovery communities in every town we set up in. When we went to Barrow, there was 1 or 2 mutual aid meetings a week. There's now 10. When we went to Carlisle, there was 1 or 2 mutual aid meetings a week. There's now 1 every day. We live, work, and play in the communities we work in and we live in. And now, these towns are seen as good places to go if you're in recovery. But the trauma-safe environment goes back to this universal assumption. The universal assumption that anybody who's come in sitting in front of me has suffered or may have suffered trauma. Not only do we recognise this and accept this, but like I said before, we've lived it. So the trauma-safe environment, for us, is not just about having a nice interview room where you can speak to someone. It's not about having a nice reception and good coffee. But it applies to the whole workplace. We have to treat our staff with the same respect as we treat our patients, service users, whatever you want to call them. We prefer beneficiaries. Especially in an organisation like ours, because all of our staff, we did a tally on our staff, and I think the average ACE score was 7. And that's for our staff. Yeah. If we started looking at instances of ACEs, we were looking at 400 or 500 per year. And that's for our staff. So a trauma-safe environment needs to be non-judgmental. Again, if I can remember what it was like to be that person, I can remember being that person that used to show up every week, tell you what you wanted to hear, pick up my script and walk out the door. I was the person who would come in with no real intention of changing until I was ready. But by the time I was ready, everyone was already hacked off with me. And I missed my chance. Fortunately, the world picked me up. Unconditional positive regard. So, I wouldn't be standing here if people hadn't shown me unconditional positive regard, if people hadn't treated me like a human being, if people hadn't believed what I said and identified with what I said, I wouldn't be here. Didn't get that connection until I spoke to people with lived experience. And trust, honesty and respect. Anybody who's spent a lot of time working on their recovery will have worked on all 3 of those things. It's important to me in my recovery that I practice those principles. So the good news, post-traumatic growth. There's been a lot of studies done. People who have lived through trauma and then worked through that trauma actually increase their potential. They increase their emotional intelligence. They have learned how to make relationships. They have a greater appreciation for life. The things that light me up today are stupid little things that most people take for granted. If I can pay a bill as soon as it comes through the door, that's a really good day. You know, anybody who's not been through those kinds of issues we'll get a bill and like start swearing and wait till it goes red and then eventually begrudgingly pay it. For me, being able to live a normal life is a joy. Paying a bill is a joy. It makes me a grateful person. Recovery has also shown me that I can dream. I never thought I'd be here. You know, for me, if I could stop using for a few days, that was a minor miracle. Today I've learned to dream, and I've learned that nothing that I put my mind to is beyond me. But I've also learned to be compassionate with myself. You know, someone once said, if I don't fail a few times a week, then I'm not setting the bar high enough. And that's what I want to be doing. I've developed a spiritual side that I never thought possible. Thought spirituality was for people who already had everything else. And I've gained personal strength and optimism. So if we spend the time working with the potential they have to contribute to the world is immeasurable. So with that, I will leave you and hand it over to Mike.